You're now listening to All Hog Sports, covering all Arkansas Razorback sports, such as football, basketball, baseball, and much more. Now, here's your host for today's show, Sam Stimpson.
This Saturday, your Arkansas Razorbacks, number 13 ranked, travel to Ole Miss in a top 17 matchup against the number 17 Ole Miss Rebels. It's at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, and there'll be capacity of around 64,000 at max. Now, this game starts at 11 a.m. Saturday, October 9th on ESPN.
Now, for the Arkansas Razorbacks.
Now, last year, Arkansas did beat Ole Miss, and the way that they were successful doing that is by rushing 3 and dropping 8, creating pressure up front, and forcing Corral to throw the ball in a drop 8 scenario, and under that, Arkansas picked up 6 interceptions, 3 of those coming from former walk-on Hudson Clark, and then 1 from Catalan as well. Now, I'm not sure if Arkansas will be able to rush 3 and drop 8, just because this is going to be the same personnel, just basically as, the defensive line has gotten a little better. Also, from a standpoint, like, Ole Miss is going to prepare to counter that, regardless if Arkansas runs it for the full 30 minutes there on defense or not. So, yes, will the concept stay the same around like a 3-5-3 or a 3-2-6 front, depending on the amount of safeties we put in the box or nickelbacks and things like that? Yes, I do think it revolves around that 3-man front creating pressure because that's what Odom, sticks to. But I don't expect it to be as heavy as a drop 8 because Ole Miss, they run the ball a lot and they're successful doing that despite their passing game receiving the majority of, their hype. Now, previewing the Hogs defense here, rushing defense has allowed 153 per game, solid number for them. And really, Arkansas in the rushing game just has to win the defensive line of scrimmage with guys like Ridgeway, Nichols, and Gregory, who are our best run defenders. And then what I call the quad stoppers in the run game, new term here, it's Henry, Poole, Morgan, all 3 of those linebackers, and then you got free safety Jalen Catalan. Arkansas has to be able to use those 4 guys to tackle efficiently and then also rack up around, 5-6 or more tackles for loss every game. Looking at the Ole Miss rushing game, though, they averaged 243.5 yards per game, which normally would lead a team. However, they average around 300 in passing. This is a heavy offensive team, runs a great spread system under Lane Kiffin. 57% of their plays have been on the ground this year, and it makes sense when you look at their running back room. Got Jerion Ely, the lead back. He's their first string back, but he doesn't lead in all the categories, just because they've been limiting his carries and stuff for conference play. That's what just about any head coach would do. 40 carries for 204 total yards. And then you got Henry Parrish Jr. He's the leading rushing leader on this team. He's got 36 attempts for 223 yards. And then another guy they have is Snoop Connor. More of a situational back for Ole Miss, as he's mainly guys on third down, red zone plays, as he's got 4 touchdowns on the year. And then also Matt Corral, he's a dual threat guy, elusive on the ground as well. 43 attempts for 161 yards, which includes some sacks in there because of the way sacks are handled in college football. But what's really impressive is the 6 touchdown number. Now, Arkansas rushing defense has to stop up front on the defensive line and then tackle well. And then in the red zone, watch for Snoop Connor and Matt Corral to stop them from rushing into the end zone and, may limit them to a field goal instead of a touchdown in those ideal scenarios in the red zone, 10-yard line, such like that. Now, the bread and butter of this Arkansas defense is their passing defense, second lowest in the nation in yards per game at 129.8 yards allowed per game, 282.8 yards allowed per game as a unit as a whole in defense. Arkansas is able to have a low number by having 6 defensive backs, starting with Hudson Clark or Ladarius Bishop at cornerback. And you got Busta Brown, CB1 for the team. You got Brooks, solid nickelback returning starter as well. Jalen Catalan's the leader on the team with 2 interceptions. Then you got Simeon Blair / Miles Slusher. Those guys split playing time. And you got Fouché, a captain at safety. Really, this Arkansas team has a lot of defensive backs that are solid, that are always consistent, like Catalan, Fouché, Brooks, and Busta. And then you got guys like Blair, Slusher, Clark, and Bishop, who all split time because they're not as consistent. And there's some times where one guy's on, like Clark did an all right job against A&M while Bishop was struggling. So you make in-game adjustments and such. I've been a believer that the game is won in the trenches. So the secondary correlates with that pass rush. Trey Williams, he's got 5 sacks on the year. And then Zach Williams. Arkansas needs 2+ sacks in this game to create pressure up front and will be put to the test against a dual-threat running back like Corral. So again, QB spy possibly with guys like Morgan. Morgan's probably the fastest linebacker in that core. Poole as well, possibly, depending on his speed, if it got better from last season. I also could see Arkansas using a spy in coverage, like a safety, Catalan, or something like that. Odom will come up with a pretty good defensive strategy against them. Now the Arkansas secondary and pass rush will be
versus
one of the top passing attacks in the nation from Ole Miss. Led by Matt Corral. He is a Heisman top runner. He's second in odds right now. He was first or tied before this weekend when they lost in the Alabama game. Corral is 87 out of 125 with 1,210 yards and 10 touchdowns in the air. That does not include his 6 touchdowns on the ground. And listen, I know last year he threw 6 picks against Arkansas, and yes, sometimes he does have turnover-prone games as he threw 5 picks in the LSU game, and it's ideal that Arkansas forces turnovers on Corral or any other quarterback in the nation, but just because he threw 6 picks last year doesn't mean that this Arkansas defense is going to, receive that again from Corral. Corral is extremely effective in this Kiffin spread offense. I wouldn't say it's super similar to ours, but, guys like Kendall Browse and Jeff Lebby work together at previous schools. This offense has lots of misdirections with a high-speed tempo, which will require Arkansas to stay healthy, avoid cramps, and be in position when the ball is going to be snapped. The playmakers in this Ole Miss offensive attack include leading wide receiver Dontario Drummond. This guy's about one of these solid slot receivers you'll see in the nation. I expect Busta Brown and Brooks to line up on him a good amount. Drummond has 24 catches for 382 yards, 4 touchdowns on the year as well. And you also have Braylon Sanders. He stands out to me as athleticism. He had an insane catch versus Alabama. Now, Ole Miss wide receiver room is a little bit banged up, so Jaden Jackson is injured, and then Jonathan Mingo also has a foot injury. Not really sure on their outcome and if they'll play this weekend, but you should know more on there. Anything on Twitter, I'll retweet from an Ole Miss news source before the game to figure out if those guys are going to play. You may see some Danish Jackson or John Rice Plumlee, the backup quarterback and starter previously a couple years ago for Ole Miss, now transformed to wide receiver. He also plays baseball. He's a fantastic athlete. And then you got tight end Chase Rogers for Ole Miss too, starting tight end, looking pretty good. Now Arkansas to counter Ole Miss has to get pressured, number one. No matter what happens in the situations for Arkansas's defense, if they don't get pressure, it's just day over, regardless of how many guys we're trying to drop. Ole Miss will beat you on the ground if they don't beat you in the air because of how dual threat Corral is, and you also guys like Ely, Snoop Connor, Drummond in the passing game. This is a team full of playmakers, and Arkansas's defense has to be on its best. Optimally, you force a turnover or 2 against Corral. I don't know if we'll get in the whole game where he throws 6 picks. I extremely doubt that, like I said. But, maybe get 1 pick off him, change the momentum, get a score off of that would be nice. Now, previewing your Arkansas Razorback offense. This offense is very run-heavy, optimally running 40-50 times a game, opening up the passing game in that selection. That's why Arkansas has high numbers on yards per completion, yards per attempt, yards per carry as well, because they have a passing threat as well. At the same time, keeping that dual threat option offense. Now for running backs, you got 223.8 yards per game through the unit. Traylon Smith, the leader, he's due for a rebound game. I'm not going to count last week. I think he got 3 carries for 4 yards. I'm not going to count any game against him against that front seven for Georgia because, frankly, those guys will all be in the league, and they'll probably win the national championship. 62 attempts for 302 yards on the season, and I want to see more Raheem Sanders in this offense, too. I'd ultimately getting double-digit carries. Every single time I see him in the game, he just seems to spark the offense. We're in a drought. We need some plays, and he did that against Georgia, too. Big physical back. And then Johnson and A.J. Green have seemed to emerge as third down threats. A.J. Green opening up the dump-off game, like third and long. Sometimes you get those completions because of his speed. And then Dominic Johnson getting a lot of carries on third and short situations. I like this running back room, though. You got 4 quality running backs that you can all start. Ain't no complaints there. At offensive line, Arkansas must be more physical at guard, and Sam Pittman actually plans to address this by giving Jalen St. John and Crawford more time at guard instead of tackle. Both of the guys were backup tackles, but it seemed like every single time Arkansas needed backup tackles, we moved the offensive line around in practice. So I love the move to put Tykees Crawford and St. John at guard because they're bigger and could be more physical than Bo Limmer and Brady Latham. They will see some playing time over those two. I'm not so sure on how many minutes and such, but I would expect them to see some point in the Ole Miss game and see how they perform, and you really take it from there, making in-game adjustments. Cody Kennedy, the offensive line coach, on there. We'll have him ready, though, to play that week. Arkansas has to be better, especially on the ground games at guard positions to open up holes for that ground game. Didn't look that way against Georgia. The passing game rolled around. Quarterback KJ Jefferson, who looks to be a little bit more healthy than last week. Not really sure on his practice reports, but if he's able to practice Tuesday, Wednesday, and so forth, would be better than last week when he was limited a lot. KJ is 24 out of 91 on the season. 900 yards in the air, 6 touchdowns with 2 interceptions. Again, Arkansas has to establish a rushing game primarily with KJ Jefferson. You want to have 8+ design carries against a Ole Miss defense, which is weaker than their offense, especially. KJ averaging 5.9 yards per carry on 40 attempts as well. Like I said, leading successful drives in converting third downs, which go primarily with the game of drop-offs from backs and then design QB runs on first, second down. Arkansas has to get number 16 going, Traylon Burks. Just about he's better than anyone on the field when he's out there on the Arkansas offense versus that Ole Miss defense. 22 receptions, 383 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Long touchdowns would be huge, so if Burks can secure one from 50+ would be huge. And he's able to use his athleticism to beat defenders. Don't oversimplify it. Get the ball to 16. Blake Kern in the passing game, maybe a little bit as drop-off. I'm looking to, have better hands within the next few weeks. Tyson Morse as well. He's a momentum changer, consistent wide receiver, pretty solid blocking too. And then rounding out the room, you've got reliable targets like Davion Warren Thompson, and then even Ketchum Jackson, who's been blocking really well when he's out there. Main key here is Arkansas has to be effective on both sides of the ball. It's not going to be a 50-50 game. I expect like 2/3 running. But if Arkansas can establish a run game more than anything, they will succeed on offense based off of Texas A&M, and the other games that Arkansas has played against top 25 talent. Now, the Ole Miss defense primarily runs either a 4-2-5 front or a 3-2-6 front by defensive coordinator DJ Durkins of Ole Miss. It depends on the game and their personnel, but I've seen both when reviewing some film. On defensive line, they got a power edge rusher in Sam Williams, who's just a tank. 5 sacks on the season, so Cunningham and Wagner look on the edge to control him, and then whichever one doesn't have him, they'll be assigned with Cedric Johnson, who has 2 sacks on the year. At defensive tackle, you got Isaiah Aiton, and then Quentin Byrons as well. So again, physical guard play up front to stop both of these heavy defenders. Linebacker for Ole Miss, you got Chance Campbell, their main linebacker, 29 total tackles on the year with 2 sacks. He's a quick linebacker all around the field. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the conference. I would have him as a All-SEC selection. It's not really the reason the Ole Miss defense is that bad. I think, though, the main thing Arkansas has to do is pass in this formation, whether Ole Miss drops 7, 8, and depending on how many they put on the box as well, based on Arkansas' success on the ground. And then also at linebacker, you got Lakia Henry. Their secondary for Ole Miss